All right, so we are going to be running through the process of backing up and restoring a VM using Veeam with Snapshot integration and replication on Nimble Storage. This is the layout that we have right now. Really what we're going to do is we're going to be running a couple different tests here. But the first one is going to be using specifically Veeam, and it's going to be set up on this particular VM, this JH Win 2012-01. It's a guest VM. It's on this host, PLU lab-ESX1, which is running off of a Datastore and volume of the same name, JH Win 2012 CS420-01, and it's named that because it's running off this array, which is a CS420. And currently, there is a Veeam backup job configured to run snapshots and do replication of this particular VM. And so we can see that that's what we've got here. We've got a volume with multiple snapshots, and those snapshots are run by Veeam. And I've labeled that here. So the process that we're going to be going through, though, just so we understand, is I'm going to be taking this volume offline, simulating that this stack or this array is no longer available. And then we're going to go through the steps necessary of bringing it up on the other array. And we've got in our lab, we've got a pair of arrays that are grouped together, but the replication of this volume and these snapshots is actually residing on a CS500 that's replicating to. Now, all of the hosts in our lab have access to both sets of arrays, which is going to be similar to some configurations different than others, but that's the way these are working. And so when we do this failover, we are going to be bringing the VM up online inside this replica volume and also running it on a different host, because theoretically, if we're simulating a failure on this side, it won't just be of the array, but potentially of the hosts that are directly connected to that. So this could simulate maybe replication between two different locations. Okay, so I have documented these steps. And this is what we're going to be looking at. The pre-configuration I've already set up, and I can send these notes to you if you're interested. The Veeam test is basically going to be made up of these 13 steps. Now, the time that it's going to take to run through this process is going to vary a lot depending upon the speed of the host, the speed of the network, and of the storage. Do keep in mind that the arrays that we're running off of are kind of old. And the hosts that we're running off of aren't extremely fast, neither is the networking. So a significant amount of the time of going through this process will be taken up in the process of rescanning HBAs and making sure hosts are connected to storage. So here, we'll go ahead and run from here. The first thing we want to do is we want to make sure that we've got a good backup of that particular VM. So I'm going to log into my Veeam server, and I've already got my Veeam console up, and I've created, this is the backup job that's been running. This JH Win 2012-01 snap and replicate. And we can see that it ran last night. I'm going to go ahead and run it again now, and we can verify that it is going to work. Yep, it's starting, and it's building the VM list. So while that runs, I'll just kind of show you what this is going to look like. So if we go into our storage infrastructure, I can see that we've got this PLU lab main. That's the AF7000 and the CS500 group, and then the CS420 here. That is the array that we're actually running these volumes off of. So if we scroll down, if we drill down into here, we can see all the volumes, and we'll go down here, see if we can find that volume, that JH Win 2012 volume. Of course, it's going to be in the J's, not the K's. Here we go. So here's 01 right there, and we can see that there are multiple snapshots and stuff that have been taken. It can see those snapshots that are inside there, and then so we're running one right now, actually, but if you go into one of these and we open one, again, this is from Veeam. You can do a similar thing from the array, but this is a little more granular. It might be running slow because we're running that backup. Let's actually see where we're at on that. If we select this, yep, it finished. So we know that it built VMs. It looked for infrastructure and it snapshotted it and it replicated that snapshot to the other side. In fact, if we go back to storage infrastructure, and so that's the array that it's running on, but we also have this other and if we go in here, we can tell the difference between an online volume and a replica. The replicas have the two little storage icons. We'll go down here to the H's or the J's, and we can see that the Win 2012 CS42001 is actually a replica from the other side. And if we open that up, we can see that there are snapshots that are replicating. And let's see if there's one in here from today, from the backup we just ran. I'm not seeing that. Oh, it's not going to show up until we actually scan the storage again, because that's a new snapshot. Okay, we're going to go ahead and let that run. So we know that. We'll verify that here in just a second. Yeah, actually, what we want to do on here is we're going to want to shrink this down so we can hop in and out of it pretty easily while that refreshes. So next step we're going to do is once we have, if we've done that, now we need to verify that the guest is actually running. So let's log into vCenter. And I am accessing this as over a VPN, so it can be a little bit slow sometimes. There she goes. So actually I went in here, my data stores are named the same as my volumes. We can see these are the two data stores, and I've just organized them in my own folder, but these are my two data stores that I've created for the testing, 01. So this is the one on the CS420, and this is 01. If we look in here and we see what virtual machines are in there, we can see that that's where that VM is, this JH Win 2012-01, and that it is powered on. Let's make sure that it's actually accessible. Windows is actually running on it. Well, okay, so we see that this is going through and scanning the rest of those. Actually, that's gonna continue to run. So actually, I better scan both of those now that we've got the new backups run, and let's see what our server looks like here. Log in. And I have been playing with this, so I crashed it earlier, but we did some testing, and that's why I got shut down. And we can see that for this particular guy, I put a text document on here that helps me identify what it is. We can see that that's the name of the server, and I put a nice green background on here so we know that this was it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close that down. Next step in this process, now that we know that we've got backups, we know that we've got a running server, what we really want to do is we want to now set that volume offline, simulating that it's no longer accessible. Now, I do realize this is a simulation, and depending on how things go offline, it's going to change how we actually do the first parts of recovery, so we just need to understand the tools for those unique situations. But what we'll do is we're going to log into that particular array. Again, bear with me, I know it's a little bit of a slow connection. And I'm actually logged into both. The 10.1.1.13 is going to be the 420 array, which is going to be the primary location of these volumes. We're going to go into Manage and Data Storage. And then I've actually created a folder just to make my, my volumes a little bit easier to find. And I've got a few volumes in here. One's a replica, that's what this little icon shows, and then these other ones here. So for the testing, 01 is the one that we want, 02 it's going to be for a different test. So if I actually select this volume, one of the options it gives me is to set it offline. And they're going to ask, are you sure you want to do this? Because obviously I've got a server, I've got stuff connected to it, and there's a server running it. Yes, I do, because we are simulating a failure. So now it's offline. We go back into vCenter. We can see we're already getting a bang on here as this refreshes. It usually takes about 20 seconds for an iSCSI session to completely time out. And once that iSCSI session times out, this data store then will no longer be accessible. And that's going to be what the next step is, to make sure that the VM or the VM's inaccessible and that the data store is showing inactive. Here she goes. So we can already see the data store shows inactive. The VM's still showing powered on though. It's trying to be resilient. As soon as we get to the point where it is not happy, make sure that VM's in there. It is. Okay. So we're going to go in here. All right, we'll give it a second. So again, VMware is pretty resilient, and it's going to run things out of cache for a while until it really knows for sure that that VM isn't accessible. And that's going to go offline here in just a second. Once that does, then what we actually want to do is we want to remove that VM from the VMware inventory. And really what we want to do this is so that when we do the restore, we don't have to worry about any conflicts or reconfiguring the VM. We can actually bring it back up just as it is. And there's other ways to work around that. That's going to be one of the simplest ones, though, is just to take it out. So actually, if we go into inventory, VMs and templates, we can see now I've got a folder again with my name. Here's that server. If we go to the summary of it, it is not really accessible, right? Yep, there it goes. And it's going to tell us specifically, right, that it's not accessible. So we're going to click OK button to abort or terminate the session. There we go. So what we want to do, though, is we're going to come over here. Yep, now it's going to show. So it took a bit. Now it shows inaccessible. So we're actually going to go in here and we are going to remove it from inventory. Now we know that when we remove it from inventory, it doesn't actually delete any files. Of course, it can't delete any files anyway because it doesn't have access to the files for that particular VM. Now that VM theoretically does not exist. But we know that the full state of that resides in those snapshots that are on the array, which were managed by Veeam. So next thing we're going to do is actually we're going to go in and we're going to do an instant VM restore, but we're not going to do it from that volume because that volume is offline, right? So we're going to have to do it from the replica. So even though that replica is offline, Veeam has accessibility into it and its snapshots and can restore out of them. So we'll go back over to Veeam here. And while that's still finishing its scans, I'm going to go in here, I'm going to find that volume, which is this one right here. It's going to show that it's offline. And we can see that after scanning that the snapshot that was run today on 6/22 is now showing up. And so we're actually going to open this snapshot and we're going to see what's inside. And of course, we know what's inside. This VM is inside. And we're going to do an instant VM recovery off of that. So we're not going to restore it to the original location because we're going to make the assumption that, first of all, that Datastore is offline, right, and we can't access it, but also that perhaps the hosts that it was running on before are also offline. So we're going to restore it to a different location. And we're going to choose what it is. In this case, it was running on PLU Lab ESX1. And now we're going to go in here and we're going to put it on 5. And I'm going to choose a folder to put this in just to make it easier to find because there's a lot of stuff in here. I've got my folder. And then the question is, what do you want it to name it? We're going to go ahead and keep the name the same because, again, we deleted the other one, so there won't be any contention for that. We're going to choose the resource pool we want to use, hit next, and the reason we're doing this is because we're going to test to see if we can. And we're not going to power it on yet, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. But we do want to make sure that it restores. All right, so that's starting that VM recovery. And it can take a little while for this to run. Okay, so it found the host. It's locking the backup file, which is really the snapshot, right? And it's checking the availability of that snapshot. So it's going to bring that snapshot online. It's going to create a clone. And then it's going to connect the ESX5 to that clone. Now it's going to rescan the iSCSI adapters. Now this part is the part that can start taking a little while. And if we go into vCenter, if we can pull this up a little bit, pull this up so we can see what it's doing. And we can see exactly what's going on right now, right? The iSCSI connection. And then we're rescanning HBAs. And as I mentioned before, this is the part that can take a little while, especially in this lab. And that is going to be different depending on your environment. But I found that that is the biggest bottleneck as far as restoring this way, is how long it takes to rescan HBAs. So at this point in time, what we've done, well, that's rescanning, right, is we've taken this volume offline, and we've taken Veeam and we've accessed this snapshot, and we've actually cloned it to a new volume, and then we're offering that volume up to this host so that we can bring the VM back online there. Still at 0%. Like I said, that does take a little while. Can't see that it doesn't exist here. Let's go back over here, though. We're going to look at our data stores. So what will happen up yet. So it'll actually create its own data store. Yep, I mean, we're certainly doing the same thing. It's taken a couple minutes. Now we're in, and we're still not making a whole lot of progress on that scan. But again, that's for my testing. That's how I've seen that this particular environment reacts. It is interesting though. If we look over here, oh, it's going to make us stay in there. So we will look at that in a minute. So just for efficiency, I'm going to actually pause the recording at this point in time and pick it back up, and then I'll be able to show you how long it actually took to scan that stuff as soon as it's done. So we can see that the HVA scanning took about 4 minutes. And again, that's going to be unique. If we pop back over to vCenter, we can see that the scanning is complete. Now it is looking up that one, or it's connecting to the new volume. And it's looking up the data store that it's creating to run this VM out of. See if it's going to show up in here. It usually shows up and says snap something or another. So it refreshes. There we go. Resignature and resolved. So it's seeing the volume with the same signature. It's going to resolve that in vCenter. So I did that. Now it's initializing the snapshot data store, resigner 18 on the host. Let's see if it shows up in here. Let's save some progress. Can take a couple minutes too. So the next step is going to be actually is that once it all is done, the last thing it'll say is to be waiting for the user to start migration, because it doesn't actually bring it up into an existing data store. It creates its own restore data store, and that's part of the instant VM recovery, which is going to be a temporary place. And that data store is actually running off of the snapshot as that's in the replica. Then once that's done, we'll make sure that that the server can run and then we'll also verify that we can show you how that snapshot is actually online on the array itself. Initializing, so it's still doing this. Oh, still doing the resignature process. If we go to the array here, keeps timing out. So here's the replication array. If we go into storage here, and we look at this storage pool, which is on the CS500, go into my, oh, it's not going to be in my folder though. It'll probably just be in this particular pool. If I remember, It'll start with Veeam. We can see that there is this volume that's online. It says Veeam target snapshot, and then it gives information about, and it shows the name of the snapshot that it's actually restored from. So we can see that there's a replica volume, but it's not offline. And that is what we're running out of. And we can see that the I/O on that particular volume is starting to pick up as it is mapping. So the virtual machine is re-registering. It's putting it back in my folder. And all those pieces say they're complete. Where is that data store? Snap. There it is right there. So here's the data store that it created. We're actually going to move this data store up here just to make it sure that it's easy to find. Just from an organization standpoint. And of course, if we look in that data store, we can see that the VM's in there. Of course, it's not running. Let's pop back over to Veeam and make sure that it's job. So it says here that it's waiting for migration. So we know that the Veeam restore is complete. So we're going to finish that. And we're going to power this guy on. Complete, says it's powered on. That was actually nice and quick. And let's open the console and make sure that it's server that actually runs. That looks happy. Come on. There we go. Let's try again. Sorry, fat fingered that. You can see it's that same pretty green. Of course, it's not happy because we crashed it. We took the volume offline while it was actually running. We'll go in here, test, say OK. We're up and running there. And there we go. Actually, it looks like I need to rename that. We can see that stuff is up and running, and that we're getting some warnings and stuff down here, but stuff is running. Close that out, and we can see it is the same server. There's the document that I created. Actually, what I'm going to do, though, is because we're going to migrate this, and it will go a little bit faster if I power it off first. So we're going to power him down. All right, so we're running in this temporary data store, and that isn't really where you want to run this thing from. And the whole idea of doing the restore is so that people can access it and start doing stuff. So really, the next step needs to be is we need to create a new home, a new storage home for this recovery, right? Because its original home, the original volume and data store exists on the other array, and those are offline and theoretically are not available. So we're going to create a new data store, and we're going to name it Nimble-CS500-01. Or that we're going to create it on the CS500 array, and then we're going to name it this, and it's going to say CS500 rather than 420 in it, just so that we can know what it's running off of. So this is actually a pretty easy process to do. We'll go in here, select this, and move this down. Let's see here. We are going to look at, so there's two groups. We'll go to the Nimble plugin. And it'll take just a minute for it to load up. As soon as it refreshes, all of the data stores that are on that Nimble group have an option. So we're going to create a data store. And do a little copy and paste here just to make things easier. There we go. All right, just so So I know what it is. Now we're going to say, well, where are we going to run this at? Currently it's running off of, what host do we want to have access? We're going to do all of them so that we can move it around when we're done here. And we'll go next. How big of a data store do we want? We're going to do 100 gigs, should be plenty. What storage pool? Well, I'm going to choose that again, we want it to run on the CS500, and that's this storage pool, and I just know that. And then I've got a folder in there just to help me to organize it better. I'm not going to mess with any of that stuff. And we are not going to set up any snapshotting on this because we're protecting this particular VM with, not with native snapshotting in the array, but with Veeam backup snapshot integration. So we're going to go to none on that. Next. And because we aren't doing any protection, and then we're going to hit finish, and we're going to create ourselves a new data store. So let's see if it's in here now. Oh, no, it's still running right down here. It's at 61%, and then it has to rescan HPAs. And of course, we know that rescanning of HPAs can actually take like 4 minutes. So it takes a little while until then that new data store is going to be accessible to all the hosts. I don't know what order it's going to scan them in. If it scans ESX5 right away, then that data store will show up, and we'll be able to migrate the VM right away. It's just starting the data store now. And we can also, though, go over to that array. And if we go to volumes on that array, sorry, it keeps timing out. Come on, there she goes. Oh, I'm just being impatient, sorry. Back over, so we're still at 61%. And again, one of the reasons this is taking so long is because it has to rescan those HPAs, and we know that could take a few minutes. But once it's created, it will show up in here, and it'll say all this, only you'll see CS500-01 in it. Let's pop back over here and see if that actually refreshed. Fine. This is not loading very well at all. All right, I'm going to guess that it's just hung. So actually what I'll do is I'll come over here, and I will just relog into that array. There we go. As soon as these graphs over here, these charts load up, then I'll be able to go into Manage and Data Storage. If we go into this pool, if you remember when I created the data store, I told it what pool to create the volume in. Go in there, and I told it what folder to put it in, which was mine. And then we can see right here that that volume's actually been created. I didn't create that in the array. It was done from the plugin in vCenter. So that's the 2012 CS500-01. It looks like we're still creating that. They're running, they're scanning. So we've started scanning on 6. So Got a minute or two before it actually shows up. So rather than you watching paint dry here, I'm going to pause this until that scan is done and the new data store shows up in here. So I'll make sure it doesn't show up here yet, but I don't think it does. Nope, it's right there. So since that is showing up there, see, oh, there it is right here. So just for simplicity's sake, we are going to take this data store and we're going to move it up into my folder just so we can keep track of it. And what we'll see is that in that data store, right, there's nothing in there. The restored VM is still running inside this temporary. There's that one. There it is. And we shut it off, so it's sitting right in there. Now, though, what we can do, what are we connected to? It's on one. So the data store is connected on one. The Stover is rescanning HBAs on all the rest of these. I can't move it to ESX5 until I know that data store is actually connected to that host. What we can do here, select this guy, and actually that's the manual way. So really what we want to do is go into Veeam, right, and it sees we're going to actually rescan for storage so it can see everything. See if it can see now that temporary volume. Yep. So here's still the replicas that it can see. All right, we see that guy's in there. It looks like we've completed all our scans. So now we know that data store is accessible from all of the hosts. And now we can use Veeam to move it. So let's go find that VM. JH 2012-01, and we can see that it's not running, right? And we're going to do a quick migration, just that VM. Tell it where we want to migrate it to. We're actually going to keep it on the same host because we're going to assume that 01 or that ESX1 is still offline. Resource pool is fine. Let's go ahead and put it in my folder though, just so that we can find it easily. And then what data store are we going to actually run? Now we just created a new data store. And fortunately we named it something easy so we can see right there, right? That's the CS500-01, which is the new data store. And we'll hit next. And we're going to go ahead and go with automatic here. All right, well, it's verifying its options there. Make sure everything's running in here the way it should. Everything's complete there. Again, how long this takes is going to have a lot to do with your particular environment. We don't allot a lot of resources in this lab to this server. I'll back over to our steps here. So we created the data store, and now we're doing a quick migrate to the new data store. And we're just going to rescan our Veeam storage and create a new Veeam backup to make sure we can start protecting it on that new volume. So we're virtually there. That just takes a little while for it to work through its process. Here we go. So it's saying, do we want to delete the VM source files? And yeah, we do. We want to take that VM out. I mean, it doesn't matter because it still all exists inside the volumes and snapshots anyway. It does kind of clean up after it if we do it that way. Starting migration. While that does that, we can see if it's doing anything here in vCenter yet. There it goes. So we can pop it to 12%, seeing what it needs to. Fortunately, it's really just an operating system, so it's not huge. 24 gigs processed. It is nice because Veeam really does give you a good step-by-step in their UI, so you can see what's going on. Pop back over here. We can see we're doing a relocation, so that vCenter call's been made. Status is at 99%. Oh, and we can see right here, right? It just disappeared out of that data store. And it says that migration is complete now. We remember where we migrated it to, which is this data store. It's still loading. And there it is, right there. Pop back over to Veeam and make sure, see, job's finished. Fantastic. And what we're going to do is we will power this guy on. Oh, did get a little bit ahead of myself. It's still doing some clean. Veeam's doing some cleanup here on the back end. So we did complete the power on. We can see that it's doing some LUN. So now that we've migrated that out, Veeam sees that it no longer needs this data store and that volume. And so it's actually going through the process of detaching that iSCSI LUN, taking that offline. And in fact, we should see that if we come out here to the array. So we know he's powered on now. Oh, yep, we can see now that that temporary data store is going offline. And let's open up the console, make sure this thing runs. All right. It's going to say what happened. Say I ran a test. That's what happens. And it's going to boot up. And now you've got a server, and it's got all the configuration stuff before. So assuming that that host is configured properly with all the network connectivity you need, IP addresses and stuff have not changed, and you've got a server that's up and running. And that is pretty much it. At this point in time, though, right, you still have a backup job in Veeam that covers that particular VM. And so you can continue to protect it that way. There he is right there. Backup and replication, right? And this guy's still going to exist. It's still, there's a, in fact, what will be interesting to see though, is if we run this backup job now, you might actually have to delete and recreate that backup job so it can re-index that, but we'll see. It's the same VM, but the storage is different now, so. Yep. Oh, no, actually, in order for this to work now, and that was actually the next step, I jumped ahead of myself, is that we need to rescan the Veeam storage so that it can see the new data stores and volumes where all this stuff exists. So going to storage infrastructure, we're going to go into Nimble, going to rescan everything. And that takes a little while because there's a lot of volumes on that. Once that's done, then we can test our backup and go. And it works like a champ at that point in time. So really that's the process that you go through. Now the restore back is going to be a little bit different, right? But really once the volume comes back online, it's just a matter of emotioning it back to the original volume. So that is the process of using Veeam to do a restore in this scenario with snapshot integration and replication. Hope that helps.